They fired the only guy who could actually save their company. Monday mornings have never been so entertaining. I never thought the end would come so suddenly. 1 minute, I was fine-tuning a critical system that kept the entire operation afloat. The next, I was being called into a cold conference room with 2 managers who barely knew what we even sold. Sitting there, I realized something important. Sometimes, you can be so vital that the clueless ones decide you're a threat. A few months earlier, everything seemed stable. I had been with the company for nearly 7 years, working my way up from junior engineer to lead architect. Somewhere along the way, I developed a system, a beautiful, complex, self-correcting automation platform that saved the company millions in labor costs. I filed the patent under my name because, at the time, they didn't have the foresight to sponsor the application themselves. I remember thinking it was odd, but I wasn't going to complain. Back then, we were a small, tight-knit team. We knew each other's coffee orders, could finish each other's sentences. But as the company grew, things changed. New executives came in. Flashy types, obsessed with KPIs and quarterly profits, but who couldn't tell a server from a toaster. It wasn't long before the old guard started disappearing. "Have you seen the new director? Looks like he's never touched a keyboard in his life," joked Sam, my closest colleague. "Give it a month," I laughed quietly. "He'll start restructuring things," I said with a smirk. We both knew how this played out. The suits would cut costs wherever they could, oblivious to the foundational people they were removing. At first, I stayed out of it. I focused on my projects, kept my head down, avoided drawing attention, but no amount of low profile could hide the fact that when something went wrong, they needed me. I had the keys to the system, figuratively and literally. I was the guy who could fix a server meltdown at 2 a.m. or deploy an emergency patch in under an hour. But the new leadership didn't like the idea of indispensable. They wanted plug-and-play employees, easy to control, easy to replace. "You spend too much time on unnecessary tasks," said my new manager during a performance review. "You should delegate more." "Those unnecessary tasks are what keep your servers from catching fire," I replied coolly. I pointed out with a slight shrug. He didn't like that. His face tightened. That was probably when he decided I was a problem to solve, not a solution to protect. Things got tense. Meetings where I once offered insights became places where I was ignored or interrupted. Decisions were made without consulting the tech team. One Friday afternoon, I overheard a conversation outside the break room. "We're paying him way too much. I bet we can get 2 junior devs for the price," muttered one manager. "Exactly," agreed the other. "The systems basically run themselves now anyway." I shook my head silently. The systems ran themselves because I made them that way. They didn't understand that without ongoing maintenance and oversight, even the best systems degrade, slowly at first, then all at once. That weekend, I thought about brushing up my resume. Something deep inside told me the storm was coming. But another part of me, the stubborn part, wanted to see just how bad they'd mess it up. On Monday, my phone buzzed first thing in the morning. "Can you stop by conference room B at 10 a.m.? Read the message from HR. "Sure," I texted back. "I'll be there." I confirmed. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I was curious. How would they play it? Budget cuts? Realignment? Some made-up performance metric I had allegedly failed to meet? I arrived 5 minutes early. The room was sterile. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a cheap wood table. Across from me sat Karen from HR and David, my manager. Both avoided eye contact. "We appreciate your contributions over the years," began Karen in that overly rehearsed HR tone. She said, looking briefly at a file in front of her. "However, we've decided to move in a different direction," continued David. He said, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. There it was. No thanks. No acknowledgement of the systems I built. No understanding of the catastrophe they were about to unleash. "Effective immediately. Today will be your last day," said Karen, handing me a thin envelope. she said, placing it on the table between us. I took it without a word. My mind was already elsewhere, calculating timelines, predicting system failures they wouldn't see coming. "Any questions?" asked David, a little too quickly. He asked, tapping his pen on the table. "No," I said calmly. "Good luck," I said with a calm nod. I gathered my things from my desk. A few colleagues gave me knowing looks but said nothing. Corporate culture teaches you not to get involved. I didn't blame them. As I walked out of the building for the last time, the weight lifted off my shoulders. They thought they'd won. They thought they were in control. I smiled to myself. They had no idea. The ride home felt strange. It wasn't sadness or anger running through me. It was something else. A cold, amused detachment. They had no idea the kind of damage they had just done to themselves. I wasn't the one who needed luck. They were. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the patent documents. Still there. Still mine. I skimmed through the legal language, smiling slightly at the line that mattered most. Rights to system architecture and proprietary processes retained solely by creator. A small oversight on their part, a massive opportunity on mine. The phone buzzed, an unknown number. I declined the call and turned the phone over, screen down. I wasn't in the mood for apologies or last-minute backpedaling. Instead, I opened a notepad and started listing everything they would need my system for within the next 6 months. Billing reconciliation, customer data syncing, automated compliance reports, server load balancing. Half the company depended on the infrastructure they just kicked out the door. "Hope they enjoy putting out fires," I muttered. I said, chuckling to myself. The next morning, I woke up to find my LinkedIn inbox flooded. Recruiters, old colleagues, even a few competitors reaching out. Word travels fast. I took my time replying. There was something satisfying about letting them wait. I spent the day reorganizing my home office, cleared out the clutter, set up my dual monitors again, sharpened the weapons, so to speak. If they wanted a war, I would come prepared. In the afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I logged into the public status page of their main platform. No incidents reported yet. Good. It would take a few weeks, maybe a month, before the cracks really started to show. The first signs would be subtle. A missed report, a billing error. Small things easily brushed off, until they weren't. 3 days later, I got my first piece of entertainment. A message from a former coworker popped up on my screen. "Hey man, not sure if you heard, but billing's gone crazy. Invoices are double charging clients," wrote Jake. He typed, sounding stressed. "Didn't they replace me with a better system?" I replied lightly. I responded, feigning innocence. Jake didn't answer for a while. When he did, it was a single line. "Upper management is freaking out," he said. He wrote bluntly. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. The clock had started ticking the moment they handed me that envelope. Later that week, while having coffee with a friend who worked at another tech firm, I mentioned what had happened. He stared at me, wide-eyed. "Wait, they fired you without securing the system rights?" he asked incredulously. He asked, setting his mug down with a loud thud. "Yep," I confirmed with a nod. I said, stirring my coffee lazily. "And you still hold the patent?" he pressed. He asked again, leaning forward. "Every word of it," I said. I confirmed with a satisfied grin. "Dude," he laughed, shaking his head, "you're sitting on a gold mine. Sue them into oblivion." He said, laughing louder. I shrugged. I wasn't in a rush. Timing was everything. Let them stumble a little more. Let the damage accumulate. Saturday night, another message came through. This time from an anonymous account. The subject line was simple. Help. Inside was a long, desperate plea. Systems failing, clients threatening lawsuits, department heads blaming each other. I wasn't surprised. Without my oversight, even simple bugs could escalate quickly. And the smart ones, the ones who used to depend on me, they were already looking for escape routes. Sunday morning, While making breakfast, my phone rang again. Same unknown number. This time, I answered. "Hello," I said neutrally. I answered carefully. "Is this Michael?" came a nervous voice. A man asked hesitantly. "Who's asking?" I replied, my tone cool. I asked sharply. "This is David," he said. "Your former manager." He introduced himself awkwardly. I almost laughed out loud. The man who had barely managed to fire me was now calling like a lost puppy. "What can I do for you, David?" I asked smoothly. I asked, savoring the moment. We've run into some issues with the system," he stammered. He said, stumbling over his words. "Really?" I said, feigning surprise. I said, pretending to be shocked. "Yeah, we were hoping you might be willing to come in, consult a little bit," he said quickly. He offered desperately. I let the silence stretch, enjoying the discomfort on his end. "You fired me," I reminded him calmly. I said, my voice even. "Yeah, but, maybe we were a bit hasty," he admitted. He said sheepishly. "Hasty," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. I repeated with a slow, deliberate tone. Another long pause. "Look, we'll pay you for your time," he said, the desperation now palpable. He tried to bargain. I smiled. "I'm not interested," I said finally. I declined firmly. "Michael, please, just think about it," he begged. He pleaded desperately. "I did," I said, and hung up. I said before ending the call. As I placed the phone back on the counter, I couldn't help but feel a deep, almost giddy satisfaction. They had thrown me out like trash, assuming I was nothing special. Now they were standing knee-deep in the consequences of their own arrogance. And this was just the beginning. After I hung up on David, the real fun began. By Tuesday, reports of system malfunction started to leak beyond the company walls. I wasn't surprised. Without ongoing patches, the predictive billing engine would start misallocating charges. Without my monitoring scripts, system errors would cascade instead of self-correcting. One by one, the pillars I built were crumbling. And I was just getting started watching the show. Sitting at my home office, sipping coffee, I pulled up a public tech forum where a few anonymous users were discussing issues with a certain company's services. "Anyone else getting double billed this month?" posted one frustrated customer. He asked angrily. "Same here, and customer support is useless," another replied. He confirmed bitterly. It was happening even faster than I predicted. Somewhere in that sleek downtown office, meetings were spiraling into chaos. Fingers were being pointed. Excuses were being made. I wasn't naive. They'd try to fix it. They'd bring in outside contractors, maybe even beg some of the old team members to come back temporarily. But it wouldn't matter. They didn't have the full architecture map. Only I did. Late Wednesday night, I got a text from Jake. "Man, it's bad," he wrote. He messaged at midnight. "What now?" I replied casually. I asked while yawning. "Client data misfiled, compliance audit incoming," he said. He informed grimly. "How many clients affected?" I inquired, pretending concern. I asked, sipping my coffee. "At least 30 major accounts," he answered quickly. He replied in a panic. I let out a low whistle. 30 major accounts. That was enough to get regulatory agencies interested. Enough to cost them millions. Thursday afternoon, my lawyer called. "I reviewed your patent paperwork," said Marissa, my attorney. She stated confidently. "And?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. I asked, curious. "You have them nailed," she confirmed. She said with certainty. "And using my system without authorization after firing me?" I prompted. I asked, smiling. "Massive infringement," she answered. "We can go nuclear if you want," she added. She offered with a small chuckle. "I want," I said simply. I confirmed without hesitation. We began drafting the cease and desist letters immediately. Formal, professional, devastating. While Marissa handled the legal side, I decided to have a little fun on my own. I logged into some public monitoring dashboards they had foolishly left unsecured and watched their uptime metrics tank. Red alerts flashing. Service degradation notices piling up. That night, I received an unexpected email from a former client, someone I had built custom integrations for years ago. "Michael," the email began, "we're considering moving platforms. We heard you might be consulting independently." He wrote hopefully. I smiled. Word was spreading. By Friday, the company finally admitted internally that they had a critical systems issue. Jake sent me a screenshot from a company-wide memo. "Due to unforeseen challenges, please be advised that our platforms may experience intermittent downtime." The memo read blandly. It said, "Trying to downplay." Translation: "Everything's on fire, and we have no idea how to fix it." Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find David standing there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Michael, please, can we talk?" he pleaded, wringing his hands. He begged desperately. "Talk about what?" I asked calmly. I asked, feigning ignorance. "We're willing to offer you a consulting contract," he said hurriedly. He proposed eagerly. "I'm not available," I replied coldly. I declined without emotion. "Name your price," he said desperately. He insisted, his voice cracking. I tilted my head, studying him. "You think this is about money?" I asked softly. I asked with a slight smile. He didn't answer. He knew better. "This is about respect," I continued. I said, enjoying the moment. "And you showed none," I finished. I concluded sharply. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Defeated. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," I said, stepping back inside. I said before closing the door. The letter Marissa sent Monday morning was beautiful. In precise, brutal legal language, it outlined every patent violation they had committed since my termination. It demanded immediate cessation of operations involving my system, full accounting of damages, and a hefty settlement proposal. The alternative? A full-blown lawsuit that would make public every misstep they'd made. Tuesday, they tried to call. I didn't answer. Wednesday, another email arrived. This time from their corporate counsel. "We believe this is a misunderstanding," it began, trying to sound reasonable. He wrote nervously. "There is no misunderstanding," Marissa responded for me. She replied firmly. Thursday, news started leaking into industry blogs. Anonymous tips about major outages, client losses, potential lawsuits. Their stock price dipped. Not a crash yet, but a clear tremor. By Friday, another former client contacted me. "We're looking for a stable solution," he said plainly. He explained during our call. "I can offer that," I replied with a smile. I promised confidently. A week later, I officially launched my own consulting firm. Small at first, but nimble. Smart. Built with the lessons I'd learned watching fools destroy themselves. Clients trickled in, then poured in. Within a month, I had more work than I could handle alone. I hired Jake and a few other good ones who had jumped ship. Together, we built something stronger, leaner, smarter. Meanwhile, the company that fired me stumbled from one disaster to another. Legal fees piled up. Clients walked away. High-level resignations followed. One night, Jake and I grabbed drinks to celebrate. "Remember when they said the systems basically ran themselves?" Jake laughed, raising his glass. He laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah," I said, clinking glasses. "They were half right," I smirked. I said, laughing quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "They ran themselves. Straight into the ground," I finished. I said with satisfaction. We both laughed, loud and free. It felt good. Not just because I'd won, but because I had stayed true to myself. I hadn't stooped to their level. I had simply let their own arrogance destroy them. And honestly, I couldn't have scripted it better myself. It didn't take long for things to escalate beyond anyone's control. By the second month, the company was in full-blown survival mode, Clients were bailing out faster than they could send apology emails. Regulatory agencies were sniffing around, and the board was demanding answers the executives didn't have. Marissa's legal action landed like a bombshell. We filed the official lawsuit, citing patent infringement, contractual violations, and damages. It was a neat, lethal package that spelled disaster for them. Monday morning, I sat in my office, coffee in hand, as my phone buzzed. "It's happening," Marissa texted. She messaged confidently. I opened the news app. Front page. Lawsuit filed against the company, citing unauthorized use of patented technology. Terms undisclosed, but sources said the damages could be astronomical. The comments section was brutal. "Who lets go of the guy who built their backbone?" one commenter wrote. He asked sarcastically. "Another case of upper management not understanding how anything works," another added. He commented bitterly. By noon, my phone rang. I recognized the number instantly. It was David again. I let it ring, savoring the control. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. "Michael," David said breathlessly when I answered. He blurted out, almost tripping over his words. "David," I replied coolly. I greeted him without emotion. "We need to settle," he said quickly. He stated in a panic. "Do you?" I asked, pretending to consider. I asked, dragging the words. Yes, we do," he insisted. He emphasized desperately. "You'll need to speak to my lawyer," I said, keeping my tone icy. I stated firmly. "Can't we just talk, man to man?" he begged. He pleaded pathetically. "You mean like you did when you fired me?" I asked sharply. I asked, raising an eyebrow. He fell silent. "Goodbye, David," I said, hanging up. I said before ending the call. Marissa scheduled an official settlement conference. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. The conference was held in a neutral office downtown. Long table, neutral walls, a sterile, empty feeling to the room. I arrived early. Marissa was already there, looking composed, organized, lethal. Across from us, David sat with the company's legal team. He looked thinner, older, crushed. "You know why we're here," Marissa began crisply. She said with authority. David nodded mutely. "We have clear, documented proof of unauthorized use of Mr. Sanders's patented system," she continued. She explained firmly. One of their lawyers tried to interrupt. "Your patent is overly broad," he argued weakly. He attempted to argue. Marissa smiled thinly. "We'll let the court decide that," she said. She replied icily. David cleared his throat. "We're prepared to offer a settlement," he mumbled. He said, almost whispering. Marissa nodded. "We're listening," she said calmly. She acknowledged with a slight nod. Their lawyer slid a paper across the table. I glanced at it. Lowball offer. Insulting. "No," I said simply. I declined without hesitation. They fumbled, whispered among themselves. David looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Another offer. Higher. Still not enough. "No," Marissa said for me. She rejected curtly. I leaned forward slightly. "You're not just paying for what you used," I said, voice cold. I stated with steel. "You're paying for every client you lost because of it," I added. I concluded sharply. David wiped his forehead with a shaking hand. A third offer came, much higher. Respectable. I still waited, letting them squirm. Finally, Marissa looked at me. "Your call?" she said quietly. She said, giving me control. I let the silence stretch, then nodded. "Acceptable," I said. I agreed with a slow nod. David sagged visibly in his seat, like someone had cut his strings. Papers were signed. Hands were not shaken. As I walked out of the building into the bright afternoon sun, a strange peace settled over me. It wasn't just about winning. It was about setting things right, about proving that competence, integrity, and patience could still triumph in a world that often rewarded the exact opposite. Marissa caught up with me at the curb. "Congratulations," she said with a rare smile. She congratulated warmly. "Thanks," I said, exhaling slowly. I responded sincerely. "You played the long game perfectly," she added. She praised thoughtfully. "Sometimes it's the only game worth playing," I replied. I answered with a half-smile. As we shook hands and parted ways, I realized that this was more than just a career victory. It was a new beginning, not built on someone else's mistakes, built on my own terms. Life moved on, but it didn't slow down. Within a few months, my consulting firm was thriving. Clients came pouring in, some of them survivors from the collapse of my old company, others referred by word of mouth. What started as a 2-person operation soon needed a team of 10. We grew fast, but we grew smart. One crisp autumn morning, I walked into our small but bustling office, coffee in hand, and took a deep breath. It smelled like ambition, not desperation, not fear, not the stench of corporate politics I had left behind. Jake spotted me and waved from across the room. "Boss man's in the house," he joked. He shouted, grinning broadly. "Try not to sound too surprised," I replied with a chuckle. I answered playfully. We settled into a meeting with the team, discussing new projects and client demands. It felt real, earned. No backstabbing, no drama, just talented people solving hard problems together. At lunch, Jake and I sat outside the building, enjoying the last warm days before winter hit. "You ever hear what happened to David?" Jake asked casually. He asked while unwrapping his sandwich. "Bits and pieces," I said, sipping my coffee. I answered nonchalantly. "He got forced out," Jake continued. "Board blamed him for everything," he said, shaking his head. I shrugged, feeling nothing. "Poetic," I said simply. I commented without emotion. Jake laughed and took a bite of his sandwich. "I guess karma doesn't miss," he said with a grin. He joked, raising an eyebrow. "Nope," I agreed. "Just sometimes takes the scenic route," I added with a smile. I said thoughtfully. We sat in silence for a while, watching people rush past. Everyone was busy chasing something. I wasn't chasing anymore. I was building. That evening, I sat down at my desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and started sketching ideas. New systems, smarter architectures, patents that could change industries. The possibilities were endless. My phone buzzed. A message from Marissa. "Congrats on the expansion," she texted. She congratulated warmly. "Thanks," I replied. "Couldn't have done it without your help," I added. I answered appreciatively. She replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. Professional to the end. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through old files, designs I had created years ago. Notes and scribbles from late nights at the office. A picture of the first prototype I had ever built. I smiled to myself. Back then, I had been just another faceless employee, hoping someone would notice my work. Now, I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had built something better, stronger. Because I believed in my own worth when they didn't. The old company didn't survive the lawsuits. Within 6 months, they filed for bankruptcy. Their assets were liquidated, their name erased from the industry. A cautionary tale in business schools about hubris and incompetence. Jake showed me an article about it one morning. "End of an era," he said, handing me his tablet. He said solemnly. I skimmed the article, then handed it back. "Good riddance," I said simply. I stated without a second thought. He laughed, shaking his head. "You're cold, man," he said teasingly. He teased with a grin. "Experience is a brutal teacher," I said, smiling faintly. I replied with a smirk. At the end of the day, I didn't celebrate their downfall. I celebrated my freedom. The freedom to choose who I worked with. The freedom to build without bureaucracy strangling every decision. The freedom to respect my own value. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I stood looking out over the city skyline from my apartment balcony. The air was crisp. The world felt wide open. I thought back to that Monday morning when they fired me. I smiled. They thought they had ended my career. All they did was set me free.